Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there,
How dare you!
all guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hey guys, what is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we are about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Doc Brown, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus lens to take a second look at everything. Well, hey, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Be sure and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Down below, we have our banner of our social media at their various platforms. Be sure and check those out. That would be much appreciated. Well, hey guys, with all the junk out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff. What do you say? I got a returning guest here. The first time this guest come on, he blew my mind with the whole pathway of the souls and the ancient mounds, and just added another piece of the puzzle to this giants that I'm so fascinated with. But I honestly just finished an audio book that him and Andrew Collins had just worked on together a few years ago, and I had to pick his brain. I had to get him back on here because I wanted to talk about Edgar Cayce, Zaitun, and Joan of Arc. Those were three things that they talked about in this book that I had never heard of, and I found just extremely fascinating. But I'd like to welcome back to the show Dr. Gregg Little. Dr. Gregg, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you. Glad to be back. I'm not doing many shows now, and I suspect this will be the last one that I do for quite a while. I'm kind of absorbed into the Mountains, redoing the Mound Encyclopedia right now. So it's good to be here, and I haven't talked about this much. The book you're referring to is Origins of the Gods. This is it. And again, I really haven't talked about it much. It's doing okay, but on interviews, I don't discuss it much. Andrew really doesn't either. So, okay, I'm glad you like that stuff. It's Edgar Cayce. Loads of people call him Edward Cayce. I think that's a psychological thing. And then, of course, Joan of Arc and Zaitun, Egypt. My wife and I have been to Zaitun and the church where the apparitions occurred in the 60s and early 70s. So sure, fire away, whatever you want to ask about. I'd be glad to at least put in my 2 cents or whatever it is, whatever it's worth.
Well, I guess let's start with the apparitions in that temple. But if you could, I guess just give like your 30,000 foot view of kind of what we talked about pre-roll about the difference in the atmosphere for apparitions and spiritual contact. I think that's a good grounding for them.
Well, in the interview that we did before, was it about a year and a half ago, maybe?
It was about a year, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I talked about the electromagnetic spectrum, electromagnetic energy spectrum, and the Earth has an ambient spectrum or ambient frequency. It's called the Schumann resonance. And there's really 3 levels of that, and they're all multiples of each other. And it's caused by reflections off the Earth's surface. Humans evolved with the natural Earth's Schumann resonance. And we know that when our brain waves reach the same frequency as the Schumann resonance, that's when strange things start happening. People have experiences. People see entities. And to tell experienced, say, meditators when it's really right between when you're awake and when you go to sleep. It's not exactly meditation, but it's like the cusp between wakefulness and meditation, and and I'm talking about brain waves now that are measured by an electroencephalograph. So the problem that's happened, and what I discussed last time, is that we live now in an electromagnetic energy cesspool. We all have cell phones. Cell phones are constantly putting frequencies out. We all live where there's cell towers, and all the cell towers are bombarding us with electromagnetic fields constantly. We also have all the radio waves coming in from radio stations, TVs that broadcast, we're getting those waves. And the truth is, now we're getting blasted from thousands upon thousands of satellites that are used for not just communication, but also for cell phones and so on. So we live in an electromagnetic energy cesspool. And being in a place where you're simply going to be immersed with the Schumann resonance is very difficult. You pretty much have to go to a very remote spot where there's no houses, there's no electricity, because even the electromagnetic energy fields are caused by electricity also. There's also electric fields, but those they don't give quite the same effect as the electromagnetic ones do. So we're really blocked today from getting to that exact mental state where you're right at the Schumann resonance. And I believe that probably has something to do with the rise in things like hyperactivity disorder, that other mental illnesses, I believe, where we have extreme rises. I think it has something to do with it. And I didn't come up with that. There's a lot of other people that believe that. There is evidence that indicates that as we've increased the amount of electromagnetic fields in the environment, that various mental illnesses have increased. But of course, correlation is not causation, so we don't really know for sure. So back in 1968, of course, there weren't any cell phones in 1968. There were, however, a lot of radio and TV towers and all that. And after the 6-Day War between Israel and Egypt and some other countries, in a very small suburb of Cairo, Egypt, there's a church called the Church of St. Mary. It's a Coptic Christian church. And on the evening of April 2nd, 1968, there were two Muslim auto mechanics working on the other side of the street. And they happened to see a person, or at least they thought it was a person, walking around the top of one of the spiral towers at the top of the roof of the church. Now, that church actually has 8 of these towers. They're like domes. They're all domes, but they look like a tower. So one of them called emergency services, and the other one ran into the church to get the priest, to get him to come out, because they actually got the impression that it was a nun who was dressed in, a flowing robe and looked very much like a nun. And she was in a very precarious position, and they actually thought she was going to commit suicide, jump off the top. So
Wow.
the priest came out, the emergency crew came out, and by that time, the figure was gone. Now, exactly what happened between June 2nd and June 3rd, I don't know. But suddenly, in Zaitun, in the Coptic Christian church's populace, word started circulating that an apparition of the Virgin Mary had appeared that night. So the next night, there were literally thousands of people out watching. And the night after, there were thousands of people out. And this built so much, that exactly a year later, there were 250,000 people outside. They
Wow.
took photographs during this period of time. And of course, I haven't described what has occurred, but almost every night during that time period, there was a sequence of events. And what the events were was, first of all, there was blinding light. Huge blinding flashes of light occurring at the top of these dome structures on the top of the building. And then from the blinding flashes of light, there would be these formations of what looked like huge birds, but the birds everybody identified as doves. So then they were seen going around and around very slowly. And then there would be a sort of ball of mist, a glowing ball of mist that slowly solidified into the form of a woman. And the woman often had a crown above her head. She sometimes had a huge rosary that went down the front of her and around her neck. She had on this flowing dress or flowing robe. She sometimes carried a baby. She sometimes sat down on the top of the dome. She would blow kisses to the people watching. She would bow to them. They said that when I say they said, this is all in writing and it's in books. There are lots of pictures of this, that she had pieces of olive branches. And of course, that's a peace offering. And she would be holding them out toward the audience or the crowd to see her. The non-Christian newspaper called El Seculo in Cairo had investigators there. The Egyptian government had investigators there. And the Coptic Christian Church had investigators there. So it started on April 2, 1968, and it went right until, it went 13 months and it ended in 1970. But it happened almost every single night. April 2nd, 1969 was the peak of it when there were 250,000 people. Some of the people that witnessed it, there were lots of Americans, again, lots of photos. Most of the photos have been put in the public domain. Exactly why people don't know about this, man, I'm not really sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it. When I read it, that blew my mind.
Well, I heard about it when it happened, but I was pretty poor then. I had just gotten out of high school. Egypt was forever away. Couldn't have imagined trying to go over there. And the 6-Day War had just ended. There was huge tension over there at the time. And a lot of Egypt was under Israeli control at the time. So that's what a lot of the psychological and religious background investigators always cite. They say there was so much tension between the Muslim population and the Coptic Christian population that this sort of event was stimulated by that. So not many people, there's no one that I know who's ever written about it that says the whole thing is a hoax. I've never read anything like that. The worst they say is that, well, the people hallucinated, and they say, we're not sure about the pictures. There's a psychologist and a geologist that believed that it was caused by piezoelectric electricity forming plasmas at the top of these metallic domes, and that somehow people read into it or had their own experiences from it. But a lot of the photos are very clear. They show what looks like a woman. They show what looks like a woman holding a baby. But remember, the pictures are light forms. So they don't look like a solid person with different color, although some people did say they had different colors. And I know that you can't really show those because you don't have those online, but I might be able to stick up a couple here so people can see them. I don't know how visible these will be. This is the woman sitting on the church with a baby on one of the steeples. This one is how she was walking around. This is actually a painting, this top one, but it was from a picture. They took this and then they generated a painting from it. This is how it initially started. It's like this amorphous glowing ball of light came up, this almost a mist. Here's another one, a close-up of, these are the doves. These are the giant doves going around.
Yeah,
and this
I can see the nose, the chin. I mean, it looks like a side profile of a person.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very strange thing. It's a very strange thing. My wife and I went to this place, and we actually spoke to many of the people that were there on April the 3rd, 1968, the night after it happened. When we were there, the church was absolutely packed with people. And this was in the around 1989. No, it was in the 1990s. Around 1996 or 97, I believe we were there. And we picked up copies of the Egyptian newspapers at the time that had photos. Those were copyrighted, so I wasn't able to reproduce them. And I couldn't figure out who do you ask for permission or what. But I got actual copies of some of the photos while we were there. And it's a very strange phenomenon. It's the greatest pictorial proof that I've ever seen that there is something that sometimes intrudes into our physical world that has some sort of spiritual source, call it that. Now, spiritual source can mean a lot of different things, but it's a very strange phenomena, and a story that almost the vast majority of people have never heard of. And again, why?
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know. I wrote about it in a the 1994 book, Grand Illusions. I've mentioned it in some other books before. But again, why it's not really popular or that well known, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's mind blowing because even like that one guy you said, the psychologist tried to say, it was a hallucination. I mean, that's a pretty mass hallucination shared between thousands and thousands of people.
Well, absolutely.
And the pictures.
Even the Egyptian government said millions of people witnessed this over the year and a few months that it occurred. And what Persinger and Durer, those are the two. Michael Persinger was the psychologist, and I actually interacted with him quite a lot while he was alive because he was doing research on electromagnetic and geomagnetic forces related to UFOs and so on. So Persinger believed that there were these plasma forms that were occurring on the top of these metallic domes, and that people would look at it and basically imagine. It's not exactly hallucinating.
Like the ink blotter test. It's
like
a
a Rorschach is an ink blot test. But the pictures are the problem. And the descriptions, the absolute descriptions. There's one guy who was one of the investigators for the Coptic Christian Church, who pushed his way through the crowd. I wrote a lot of his story in the book, and I quoted a lot of what he said. He pushed himself all the way to the front, and he would hear the crowd all around the church. There were all 360 degrees around the church. And as this figure moved around the dome and saw the people below, he could tell where it was because they would be screaming, they'd be applauding, they'd be yelling, and then it kind of moved all the way around. And then when it got to him, he said that this form, it was very bright, but he could see it looked solid, and it looked surreal, but it looked solid, and it looked down. And he could see blue coloration on one of the veils that she had on. And he could see different colors in the rosary that was around the form's neck. And he was convinced. He was one of the people that helped them declare it a miracle. But of course, it's Coptic Christian, which is not the Catholic Church, and that's why the Catholic Church does not ever talk about it. But to me, It's the most famous and most documented of all of the Marian apparitions. And I've written about a lot of them, but this to me is the most impressive.
Yeah, and you had mentioned the plasma, and in your book, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you basically come to a hypothesis that there's certain locations, like where there are fault lines or whatever the case may be, but there's just certain locations, like sacred spaces, if you want to say that. But it can manifest these energies and produce these plasma fields and portals and balls. And basically, they're doorways for things from another dimension, whatever you want to call it, spiritual place, whatever. But something is using these plasma portals and balls like a tool to communicate with us.
That's an interesting way of putting it. And yeah, I would agree with that.
Hey guys, it's no secret that every single day your dollar loses its value. If a man invested $1,000 in silver in the 60s, today that same $1,000 would have magically turned into almost $30,000. Silver and gold only continues to increase in value. If you have a 401k or money sitting in savings, that is just a number in a computer system that is one EMP or hack away from being deleted forever. I've recently teamed up with Cornerstone Assets and Metals and started investing in gold and silver myself. And I highly encourage the listeners, if you have money in savings just sitting there, invest it in hard, tangible assets. The same thing with your 401ks. Take a 20 to 30% cut of that 401k, that number in a computer system, and invest into hard, tangible assets that is proven to only increase in value. Be sure to check out the link in the description or the number on the screen, and be sure to tell them that Doc Brown from Prometheus Lens sent you. Torches high, guys. Are you a hunter, a hiker, or just an outdoor enthusiast? Well, if you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by. And finding all-American made is like finding Bigfoot in the woods. Hence the name of Squatch Survival Gear. Head on over to squatchsurvivalgear.com. Use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide.
Persinger, the researcher in Canada, Michael Persinger was his name. He, PhD in psychology, a neuropsychologist. Persinger even speculated that haunted houses, where researchers had gone and for years and years there were all these anomalous events occurring. He did research trying to find if there were fault lines under these houses that kind of emerged under them, because he believed that piezoelectric electricity, which is generated from the grinding of two fault lines pushing against each other, not an earthquake. An earthquake takes away the stress, but it's the stress where they're pushing together very hard and it causes electricity. Well, the electricity follows the fault lines and emerges at some point, and when it emerges, it forms itself into a plasma. A plasma is a superheated ball of gas that is then, and that's not really a true definition of it. It's kind of close, but it's the fourth state of matter. And they form all different shapes and different colors and throw lights out. When you get close to them, they do in fact cause hallucinations. That is true. But the hallucinations are not photographable. That's why I go back to Zaitun. That's why I think it's the most impressive case. But Persinger himself speculated that there was a fault line under the church at Zaitun, and for some reason he had charted the earthquakes that had occurred in that area before and came up with the distances and so on. But he was stumped with that. He said there are no fault lines under the Church of Our Lady in Zaitun. So, yeah. That's the theory. I tend to go along with it. I believe there's a little more to it. And I actually believe that plasma itself has a form of sentience. And by sentience, it's awareness. It's not something that we can really understand. And it's not something that our logic can really tie down either. I'm at that point where we can't apply human logic to this. We're always trying to understand it and figure out what does it want and so on. I don't think it wants anything. And in fact, I think it evolves with us. I think it interacts with us. I think it, and the interaction does not occur the way that we would logically think it might. But it does form itself into shapes in accordance with the people that are witnessing it or the people who are perceiving it. So that's what I believe is going on here. And of course, I think the same thing occurred to Edgar Cayce, who you started with. I think Cayce interacted with it. Joan of Arc interacted with it. And in the book, I talk about another person, the very first contactee, Emanuel Swedenborg. Swedenborg, who was the first contactee, interacted with this energy forms for 28 years. He was actually the first UFO contactee, but he was a UFO contactee in the year 1743. And Swedenborg was a very respected scientist. And again, this kind of stuff is ignored by not just the UFO field, but by skeptics and others. They'll just say, well, Swedenborg was a spiritualist and just, made up a lot of that, or it was all visionary and so on. But no, Swedenborg said the beings that he interacted with were solid and physical, that he had hugged them. They walked with him. They came with him into his room to talk with him, and he sat with them and all that over a period of 28 years. But they lie. The ones that interacted with Swedenborg lied to him, just like almost all the contactees in the 1950s and early 60s said things like, a being occurred to me after a flying saucer came down and a portal opened, and then a Nordic-looking woman walked out and said, I'm from the planet Venus. Or a Nordic-looking man walks out and said, I'm from Jupiter, or wherever, or the moon, that we live on the moon, or Mars. Every one of those planets has been mentioned by contactees. And in the case of Swedenborg, they told him that, they have cities just like they have on Earth, on Mars. And Swedenborg took a ride all the way to the planet Jupiter. And all these planets are inhabited by people like us with cities on the surface. And that's what they told him. That's what he wrote in his books. Earths in the Universe was one of his early books. And all that's untrue. We know that those things don't occur on those planets. We know that. And I've had people say, well, maybe they went underground, or maybe it disappeared, or whatever. Well, no, that's a little much. That's not that long, a couple hundred years, 1740s to now. No, It didn't disappear. It was never there. So the beings that talked to a lot of the contactees were the same kind of energy manifestation, I believe. I don't think all of the contactees were lying. I certainly don't think Swedenborg was lying. I think
now, did he have a painful death, Greg? Because I've read and heard a lot that a lot of these people that said they've seen these balls of light and apparitions and got around them, that they ended up like getting cancer or some kind of radiation poison and died like terrible deaths.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know how Swedenborg died. I've actually been to his crypt, which is in this massive cathedral in Uppsala, Sweden. And it was so big, it was hard to get a photo of it. Because Swedenborg was a national hero. He was the greatest scientist in Europe at the time. He was also an ambassador, and he worked for the country of Sweden, traveling around. His first experience was in a small, I call it a pub in London. And he was eating alone in a corner, and this figure just appeared in front of him. And he ran back to his room, and in his room, the figure then appeared to him there, physically manifested. The police were called. The police sat with him that night. I mean, this is all documented.
Oh, wow.
Police sat with him in the night to make sure that everything was all right, because he was a diplomat from Sweden, a very important man, very famous too. But I don't know how Swedenborg died. I don't know that. That's interesting. I'll find that out. Cayce didn't die that way, and of course, Joan of Arc had a pretty painful death. She was burned at the stake at age 19. I mean, that's incredible.
I never was taught that, Greg. That's what blew my mind. Like you said, how people don't know about these apparitions in Egypt. And I was taught about Joan of Arc in school, but I was just told that she was a revolutionary person and she dressed as a man and led, in battle. But they ended up thinking she was a a witch or something and
Well,
burned her at the
yeah.
stake, and that was it.
Well, the Catholic Church did burn her as a heretic. And because her visions, they said, were of Satan and everything was of Satan, but it was the Catholic Church of England that did it, and they basically captured her and took her to England, and they did a trial, and then burned her at the stake, which was what they were supposed to do. Most of what we know about her actual apparitions come from the trial. And they come from the witnessing of the many people that saw her during that time period. And the things that she did were so phenomenal to the English and the English military that they could not imagine that anybody could do that without the help of Satan. She was so good. So at the age of 13, she was very poor, a very typical rural young girl at the time in France. The actual year was 1412 when she was born. I had to look that up. 1412. And when she was 13, of course, England had captured about half of France at the time. And there was a Dauphin. The Dauphin is basically a prince who's not yet king. But England had claimed the throne of France and so on, and they had been warring with France and had about half of France. And so at age 13, Joan was a sheep herder for her family. They were very poor. So she went out to the fields every day with the sheep, and while she was there, a ball of light, a luminous ball of light, came down from the sky and landed. And it scared her, but at the same time, it fascinated her. And there was a voice that she heard. She didn't see anything in this ball of light at first, but there was a voice that spoke to her. We don't know exactly what the voice told her at first, except she should keep coming back. So she started coming back every day, and the ball of light came every day, and it started manifesting physically. And inside of it, at one time, she saw thousands of angels and Gabriel. It's like they were all confined in this sphere, and she could see the angels behind Gabriel. And then there was Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret and others that she saw, all of which were important saints in Catholicism. So at some point in this, the voice told her that she had a task that she had to perform, that she would have one and only 1 year to perform the task. And the task was to return the crown of France to France and make the Dauphin king and drive the English out of France. But she would have just 1 year.
A 13-year-old kid.
Yes.
Wow.
Female. Couldn't read and write. It was very common in those days. She was a commoner. So Joan, there's a movie called The Messenger. It's a very good movie. Chances are anybody that has a cable service or Netflix or whatever, you can see the movie, and it's a somewhat good depiction of it, but it can't really go into the detail that's necessary to understand it. And they kind of make it very mystical. They show some events that didn't happen. Like most people think that she found a sword that just manifested in front of her. That's not true. That's a confabulation for the movie. Makes a good story and all that. But the sword she actually did while she was the head of the French army. She was the head of the French army at the time. She sent a group of men to a church, and she told them to go to this particular altar and to count a certain number of planks on the floor and to remove a certain plank. And under it, they would find this sword, this famous sword. And they did it, and the sword was there. That's the sword story. It actually did exist. Go ahead. Did you want to ask something about
Oh,
that?
I was just kind of blew away.
I mean,
It's
it's
obviously something
amazing.
told her that was there.
Yeah. Well, she was told that she would be wounded in the first series of battles, but she would recover. And so she went to the Dauphin. She got um, she got an audience with the Dauphin. The movie does a pretty good job in showing what happened. She didn't know what he looked like. Nobody knew what these people looked like then. There were no newspapers, there were. It's not like their picture was everywhere. She was a commoner. She was a rural village commoner. She had an uncle who got her a horse and some men's clothing. She had cut her hair short, which women didn't do. And the reason that nobody knows for sure why she was allowed to see the Dauphin in his court, but the reason appears to be that there was a legend about a young girl who was a sheep herder who was from the exact same region that Joan was from, who would lead the French army at a time that France was invaded by England and would free the French. That was the prophecy. So there was an old prophecy. And the movie does a pretty good job depicting this part and how they tried to trick her and make her believe someone else was the Dauphin. And that was the way that they were testing her to see if she was being led by God or if she was being led by Satan or some demon. And so she did recognize who the Dauphin was. And for whatever reason, a lot of this part isn't known. For whatever reason, the Dauphin went along with it. He made her the head of the French army, which had been battling England for a long, long time. She immediately, it was 3 days late. They made her stay for 3 days, and the movie explains why. But 3 days later, she attacked and took this fortress that they'd been trying to get for a year and could not, that the French were trying to get, and she took it the first day. And then she took a second one, and she got hurt in that battle. Everybody thought she was dead. She was shot by an arrow. And the next morning, she got up and led another battle. Again, the movie gives a pretty good depiction of it and won it. She basically then proceeded to win a long series of battles, driving the English out of France. She went to the coronation of the Dauphin. He was made the king of France, and then there was a plot against her. She was so famous and so beloved by the people that she got tricked, and the English supposedly had invaded again, but they set a trap for her, and this was done with the knowledge of the French leadership. And so they trapped her and they took her hostage and did the trial and burned her at the stake. That is the story. But she saw these balls of light her entire life. They interacted with her. There is only one instance that I have ever found in the literature where someone else had claimed to have seen her talking with the balls of light. And that's when she was leading the French, because she would pray constantly. She would constantly have, she'd do confession every day, several times a day, because she believed she was going to die at any point. And of course, the belief then was that if you hadn't confessed your sins, then you had to confess regularly, or you would go to hell or maybe purgatory. So It's an interesting story. And that the truth is, I got interested in Edgar Cayce because I had learned about her, Joan of Arc, long before I had learned anything about Edgar Cayce. And Edgar Cayce also saw a ball of light when he was 13, which appears to be that kind of a magical age when a lot of weird stuff happens to kids.
If you're someone who still thinks the wild has secrets, who feels stories woven into the wind, this brand's going to hit home. The Soul Squatch makes Squatch-approved gear. I don't mean that lightly. This stuff is functional, yes, but it's laced with legend. It's for people who believe in what's out there and what it brings out of them. They're hats, beanies, stickers. They're designed by folks who live and breathe the myth. No gimmicks, just real outdoor gear with soul. Go to thesoulsquatch.com and find something made for fellow believers, wanderers, or anyone who still listens when the woods go quiet. It's like puberty,
Yeah,
puberty age.
absolutely. Psychologists and even physicians have written that they think that there's some sort of hormonal imbalance that we have at that age, and it causes certain psychological issues, and we might be prone to having strange thoughts or perhaps hallucinations or ideology. Just weird things happen to us at that age, and then we grow out of it. But Cayce had the same thing. Cayce saw the light, the ball of light, twice. And he actually took action on it. And of course, anything else on Joan of Arc, or have I kind of?
No, you hit it, because it was just, like I said, growing up in school, I just kind of got the cliff notes. They never mentioned this. And to me, when I read that in the book, it just blew my mind.
Yeah. I had this conversation and have written about it lately on my X profile, which was Twitter, formerly Twitter. And it had to do with why nobody out there in the public really knows anything about the mound building population and the mound building culture that was present in North America from roughly the year 1000 till about 1450 or so, and how they were just everywhere. I mean, it was an incredible population, incredible number of cities and towns. The cities had up to 50,000 people. The towns had
20-foot walls.
Yeah, big walls, walled fortresses everywhere. And people just don't know. And they think they were all savages, that it was what cowboys and Indians movies show us. And no, that's not the case. And the reason it's not taught in elementary school, it's not taught in high school, none of it. So we didn't learn any of that. And so we didn't learn anything about Joan of Arc. You don't learn anything about the Zaitun apparitions. In fact, education keeps all that away from you because it gets in the way of what education wants you to know.
Right.
They don't really want us to consider all these things. I've even taught, I had a very good friend who was a Catholic priest. And I mean, he was a very good friend. My wife got upset because she said I ruined him, because he used to come over at our house. He and I would sit around and talk, and we spent a lot of time together. And she said, "Now you've ruined my priest."
You compromised him.
Yeah, the priest is supposed to be on a pedestal, and this guy was not. He wrote several books that I helped him with. He wrote for a newspaper that I ran for a while. For 3 years. But this stuff just isn't taught. We don't learn any of this. And what you do learn today, it's like Edgar Cayce. What most people know about Edgar Cayce, outside of the people who really are very interested in what he did, and I'd say that's not even would it be 1% of the population? Yeah, maybe 1% of the population is interested in Cayce, to the extent where they've looked into it some, but they have to do that on their own. And then you have the skeptics and archaeologists. Oddly, they're the ones that have written the most about Cayce in textbooks, and they just simply say he was a complete fake and a charlatan, and it's all nonsense. And it's not. I first learned about Cayce actually in psychology. And it was in sections about Joan of Arc and Edgar Cayce. And Edgar Cayce is considered by the American Medical Association to be the father of holistic health. That's
what I was going to say. He got his start by just
exactly.
like putting hands on people and giving home remedies, and people are coming from all over the country.
So Cayce, you'll see in the skeptics will say he's a faith healer. And that he put hands on him. He didn't do that. Cayce did not ever use his hands. Cayce was a devout Christian. he a very devout Christian. He was a Sunday school teacher in the late 1800s and very early 1900s. And at that time in Christianity, your Sunday school teachers were a really big deal. And Cayce had vowed as a child that he would read the Bible one time each year, cover to cover. And he had his first experience with this ball of light at age 13, right after he was reading on his right after he was completing his 13th reading of the Bible from cover to cover. Now, he had to catch up in early years, but Cayce was very, very conversed with the Bible. He didn't even need it. He could quote from all over it. But his actual stuff started in early life. His interactions with, call it the spiritual world or whatever, the paranormal, I don't really care. I go along with Native Americans, say it's all paranormal. It's really, we're dealing with a paranormal world that is what spirituality consists of. So Cayce, as a young child at age 3, it's usually trauma that causes this. He watched his grandfather die. His grandfather fell off of a horse, and he fell face first into a puddle of water, and he drowned. And after that, young 3-year-old Edgar Cayce started seeing an apparition of his grandfather, and he started talking with him. And he interacted with his grandfather, with his parents, seeing him and so on. Of course, they were all worried about it. And then he started talking to little people that came to him. He lived near Hopkinsville, Kentucky. This is where all that took place. He started seeing little people and other entities and interacting with them. He got into fistfights because he was with kids who made fun of him because they said he talked to ghosts.
Yeah.
But by the time Edgar was 12, he was very well known in the community. And part of that was Edgar had an incredible memory. He had eidetic memory, which is a photographic memory. The psychological term is eidetic memory. And Edgar could look at a page of a book, just glance at it. And then later, he could literally just close his eyes and he could read the entire thing without missing a line. And there are some really famous cases of these that occurred in Hopkinsville that were witnessed by loads of people, including, in one case, the U.S. ambassador to Peru. So it's a really weird story. The guy had been a U.S. congressman, and at age 14, when Cayce was 14, he came to Hopkinsville and he gave a talk. And Edgar's father wound up talking to this former U.S. congressman who had just been appointed the ambassadorship, and they knew each other. And he was telling him about Edgar, that Edgar could memorize anything just by hearing it or looking at it. And the ambassador was carried along with him, I want to get this correct, a 110-page handwritten speech, which was the last speech he delivered in the House of Representatives before he became ambassador. And they made a $10 bet, which in 1890, 73, 83, would be 1787 at the time. $10 would be the equivalent.
Like $100.
Well, yeah, a couple hundred today, several hundred, maybe 250 to 300. So they made a $10 bet, and the bet was this: Edgar's father bet that Edgar wouldn't touch the speech, but Edgar's father would read it to Edgar while he was in the bed. He'd read it to him 2 nights in a row, word for word. That's all it was. And then Edgar would then stand in front of the audience in the schoolhouse where he was, in front of anybody they wanted, and he would recite it back from memory, word for word, without missing a word.
That's amazing.
The newspaper was there. The ambassador was there. Local politicians were there. And it was over 50 people that were in this one classroom. And Edgar stood on the stage and just closed his eyes and proceeded to give the whole speech. And the ambassador followed it along. That was written up in a local newspaper at the time, several newspapers. And he got it correct, word for word. So that was at age 14. And that was after Edgar had his big experience, the first one. And in that experience where he had been reading Manoah, he immediately went in. And the story of Manoah is about, excuse me, it's about Manoah interacting with an angel appearing to him, which is why it's so interesting. So Edgar went home. It was dark when he got home, went into his bedroom, and then he looked down the hall and there was a big ball of glowing light that was getting bigger and bigger, moving into his bedroom. And it finally came into his bedroom, filled up the whole side of his room. And inside of it, he could see what looked like a female, which he was sure was an angel of some kind. And she basically told him, the story that you'll usually read is that she asked Edgar what he would most want to be. And he said, well, I'd like to help people. I'd like to help the sick, especially children. That's the story in some of the early books. And that's sort of true. But the angel came to him and told him that his role in life was to help the sick and help them heal, and especially help children. Then the thing happened at age 14 that I told you about. And then at age 16, Edgar was outside. Some of his family had moved to downtown Hopkinsville, from the farm to downtown Hopkinsville. And Edgar had been helping out on the farm, and they had a flat tire, and he went out to change the tire. And while he was there, suddenly it lit up, and he turned around, and there was the ball of light, and there was the entity again. And this angel told him, it's time to go. You need to go to Hopkinsville. And that was the beginning of it. So he followed that. He moved to Hopkinsville. He actually got a job in a bookstore. Now, you'll read lots of people saying, oh, Edgar Cayce was couldn't read, couldn't write, dropped out of school in like the 3rd or 6th grade and all that. Edgar was a tremendous reader. He read the newspaper every day. In those years, the newspapers were huge. If you actually get a copy of a newspaper in the 1900s, you'll see that some of them are 40, 50, 60 pages, and they're huge. And they've got every kind of news that you can imagine in them. So he read the newspaper from one end to the other every day. He read a lot of books, and he worked in a bookstore for quite a few years. But then he went to work as a photographic apprentice, because photography was then getting big, and photographers made a lot of money. But he lost his voice. Doctors couldn't do anything for him. And this was in 1899 now. We moved up to 1899. And at that time, mesmerism had begun. Mesmerism was stage hypnosis. And Mesmer, they believed there was a fluid that came out of the hands and so on, and you could hypnotize people with it. But a stage hypnotist came through Hopkinsville. Edgar at that time was a celebrity in the town because of his ability to memorize things. Edgar was almost like a mentalist, a modern mentalist. So he still had this eidetic memory, and he himself wrote about it, his ability to just look at pages in a book. And they were photographs, like photographs in his mind, page after page after page. So the mentalist came, and he did his normal things, the stage hypnotist, and he did all his normal stuff. And then he asked for volunteers, and people started saying, get Edgar Cayce, Edgar Cayce. He lost his voice. And Edgar couldn't speak at all. It was a whisper. It was so low. They said nobody could hear it. And, of course, he couldn't do business like that. So he went up on the stage. He appeared to be an extremely easy subject for the hypnotist. And he coughed a couple times when he was hypnotized, and then he could speak perfectly under hypnosis. And everybody thought, that's amazing. And so the hypnotist got him out of the trance. Show was over, and Edgar couldn't speak again. His voice was back at a whisper. So some time went by, and then a local osteopath by the name of Al Lane had learned mesmerism and hypnosis. And Edgar went to him, and for whatever reason, Lane asked Edgar under hypnosis, "Why can't you speak?" And Edgar cleared his voice. He coughed, and he said he could speak then, and he said, "There's a circulation problem in the throat. Give the entity a suggestion to increase the circulation at the throat and keep it increased." That's what he was told. Edgar is out. He's laying down. He's under hypnosis. When Edgar came to, he couldn't remember a word of this, which some subjects under hypnosis have total amnesia about it. When you get under really deep, you have amnesia. So Lane did do that. He said, "Okay, I want to suggest to you that you increase the amount of circulation, blood circulation to the neck area." And there were several people in the room, and they said that Edgar's neck turned bright red. And then he brought him out of this hypnotic trance. Edgar sat up, started coughing, and actually coughed up some blood. And he could talk. He could talk
How about that?
Normally at that point. Now, weirdly, Lane himself had had some sort of disorder for years, a gastrointestinal disorder. I don't know the diagnostic term for it. I've never read it. All they say is he had a long-term gastrointestinal disorder. And why he would even think this, it's not quite beyond me, and I'll answer that in a few minutes, but it's really pretty curious. Lane said, "Well, if Edgar can diagnose himself, why can't he diagnose me and give me the cure?" So he hypnotized Edgar again, and under hypnosis, Edgar said, "Yes, we have the entity." And then he said, "The problem is," and he proceeded to tell him what the gastrointestinal issue was, and he prescribed a particular substance to use. And this one isn't written down. In the beginning, these weren't written down. There would be people there watching that would write stories about it. So Al Lane brought him out of it, started using the substance that Edgar had recommended, and lo and behold, Lane was cured, and Lane became a believer. Word started circulating around Hopkinsville that this guy that is a celebrity is diagnosing people's physical disorders. This was now 1901. 1901. So from 1901 to 1923, Edgar helped about 9,000 people with this. The same thing.
Wow.
9,000 during that time span. Because everything changed in 1923. That's when everything changed. But up to that time, everything that people had asked him about, it was about physical disorders. And people think that, he didn't need to know where they were. He didn't need the name. They'd say, "Hey, there's this person I want to ask you about has a problem. Tell me about it." That's not what happened. People from a distance, it was very difficult to travel in 1901, particularly if you were going to travel 20 to 30 miles. That was more than an all-day trip. You had to go, it was a long way. So they would send a letter, and the letter would say something like, "My friend Billy our son Bill has this problem. It is a problem in his stomach, or it's a problem, he has a pain somewhere." They'd say where, and that we've taken him to the doctors. The doctors have tried everything, yet Billy still has this pain. Please, what can you do? So Edgar would go into a trance. They would tell him what was in the letter. "We want you to find this person. His name is Billy. He lives in this place. Tell us what it is." And so Edgar would say, it was always the same thing. He would say, "Yes, we have the entity. And the way most ARE people, I'm an ARE person. I've been one, a life member. I've done a lot for the ARE. My wife was the head of the board of trustees of it for a long time. But anyway, he would then, it's like a psychic diagnostician. He'd scan psychically the body. That's what people have said, almost like a CAT scan. I don't believe that. And I don't see that anywhere in the readings. But he did scan the body. That's actually some terms that are used. And he would find out, he would say, here's what I find. And then he would say, here is what needs to be used. Here's what you can do. Sometimes he said, there's nothing you can do. Sometimes he'd say, it's, this is fatal. And to get yourself prepared spiritually, whatever. But his remedies that he came up with, which is where this is why he's called the father of holistic medicine by the AMA. He continued all this till 1945. But remember, I said in 1923, things changed. So he did 44 or 45 years of this. The first 22 to 23 years were all health readings. And loads of letters are kept in the AREs. That's the Edgar Cayce Foundation portion of the ARE in vaults, letters from people that have attested, and my God, this worked. Doctors couldn't do anything, and there's all these different kinds of remedies. None of it is, there are some spectacular stories that are just bizarre. They're mind-numbing about how in the world did this happen. But his remedies were often very simple. And ultimately, he talked about a balance of mind, body, and spirit. He talked about eating vegetables and fruits every day. He said it's very important. And he said most problems are caused by elimination issues, and that is gastrointestinal stuff. That is what's causing most people's disorders. But he had remedies for everything from bursitis to all kinds of skin disorders, you name it, almost everything. So there are medical facilities that still use Cayce's remedies. They're still taught. But the weird stuff begins in 1923 and 24 when Cayce started giving readings that went into past lives, which he did not believe in. In fact, it frightened him and his family totally, because they were devout Christians who believed that reincarnation did not happen. There's one life per person. That's it. When you're dead, you're dead. And they weren't really sure where all this came from. And of course, Atlantis popped up, and Lemuria popped up, and all the ancient history, and mound builders popped up, which is...
That's how you found him, right?
That's really how I got into him. I interviewed his youngest son, Edgar Evans Cayce, before he died. Edgar Evans was 94 when we interviewed him. This was around the year 2002 or so. Of course, he's since dead now. But Edgar Evans did tell us that the family had lived in Alabama and, of course, in Kentucky and a couple other places. And I asked him about, how much did you ever talk about Indian mounds? And Edgar Evans said, well, it wasn't a big topic of discussion ever, but he said, we did sometimes, sitting around the dinner table, talk about mounds and Native American stuff. But in Kentucky, where Edgar was born, it's a very key Native American place. And there were lots of people there, Native Americans, and lots of mounds. So here's what I think about Edgar. And I know we're just aiming at an hour in this and we're a bit over, but I want to add one more thing about this. Edgar basically did exactly what Native American shaman did. A shaman and a medicine man. Now, not all shaman are medicine people. There's men and women shaman, men and women medicine people. But not all shaman were also medicine people, and not all medicine people were shaman. The most powerful were both shaman and medicine men. And the powerful shaman medicine men often lived away from the tribe. They didn't live in the middle of it. They weren't seen all the time. They were often isolated. So they also had early life experiences, almost all of them, where they saw little people. And that's the term they use, the little people.
Mm-hmm.
I've written a lot about the little people. And they saw ghost beings. They often saw balls of light. I've tried to give examples of that. There are lots of accounts of shaman that saw the balls of light. And they would often have someone come to him and tell them a member of the tribe is ill. He has a pain in his stomach. That's very common. He has a pain in his stomach. We've tried this and we've tried this and we've tried this. And what a medicine man would then do, and what a shaman medicine man would do, is go into a trance, a lot like a hypnotic trance. He was the interceder, or the person who interacted,
messenger between worlds
and the upper world. So the shaman would go into the trance, go to the upper world, try to get the needed information, bring it back, and then he would pass it on to the people. And sometimes in the process, the shaman would tell them what substances they need to use to heal the person. The shaman also, when they'd go into their trances, they would make predictions. They would talk about the future and what's going to happen. And they did this not as a prophecy. I mean, it's called prophesying, but it's not. They didn't give a prophecy. They would say things like, I see an iron horse coming, and the iron horse is making iron tracks, and we can't stop this, but we're going to have to do something. Be ready for it. And that, in fact, did happen. The iron horse, of course, is the railroads. So the shaman actually foresaw this, and they would tell the chief about this, and they'd tell the tribe, not that it's something that can't be stopped, but it's something that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to somehow adjust ourselves to this thing. And that's the same thing Edgar Cayce did. Cayce gave a couple of readings right before the 1929 stock crash. You'll see a lot of times that Cayce prophesied the 1929 stock crash. Well, if you actually read those readings, and even skeptics, they don't actually read Cayce's readings. They read what somebody else says about him. They don't actually read his readings. But if you read those readings, what you have is that a stockbroker, a guy he wasn't a stockbroker, he actually had a lot of stock in the stock market, which was just going up like crazy in the 20s and 28. I mean, it just was rapidly going up. And what Cayce said in the first reading, and this was about 9 months before the crash occurred, he said, I see a great disturbance coming. That's what he said. I see a great disturbance coming in the stock market, because he was asked specifically about it. And then later, a few months before the actual crash occurred, he recommended to a stockbroker that he pull all of his money out. Pull it out. And of course they didn't. They didn't follow Cayce's advice, because they felt, we need to make more. We're going to make more. So that's how he predicted the 1929 stock crash. But it wasn't, it's not like he said, in a couple months, here's what's going to happen. It's going to lose 30% of its value almost overnight. That isn't what happened.
It's kind of vague.
Yeah.
But didn't he also predict the finding of the Bimini Road down there in the Bahamas?
He did. It was okay. So Cayce, this was a reading. A lot of his readings were done at a time when all this was considered crazy. It's like the mound thing. Before we get to Bimini, let me talk about the mound thing. And I asked Edgar this. Edgar Evans, his son, Edgar Evans Cayce, told me that Dad used to say that the mounds, that they started in the South. That's where they were done first. And he said, then they went north. And he said, but all the books and all the archaeologists laughed at us, and they still do, because they all say, well, it started up north and then went south. And Cayce said that repeatedly in his readings about mounds. And he said it in the 1920s, and he said it that actually there were people here in 10,000 BC came over and basically Beringian 10,000 BC. Of course, he said there were people here before that too, because they came over in 28,000 BC and in 50,000 BC. And all that was nonsense then, because in around 1928 or so, the archaeology textbook said the first people were here no longer than 5,000 years, maybe 7,000. It couldn't have been longer than that. And so Cayce was saying at the time that no, they came over in 10,000 BC and then 28 and then 50,000. All crazy. And all the textbooks, even up to the 1980s, the textbooks that I was reading, archaeology textbooks, up-to-date textbooks in the 1980s, said that mound building began in the north and spread south. And where did it begin? Well, the old copper culture around the Great Lakes is one place, and the red paint people, which is on the east coast in the northeast, like in New England. That's the red paint. And that's where mound building started, and then they moved down to Ohio, and that's where it got huge, and then it went everywhere else. But now we know that's not true. Mound building started basically in Louisiana and Mississippi as early as 9,000 BC, and it proliferated down there from 9,000 to 5,000, loads in 5,000, a lot in between 5,000 and 2,000 BC, thousands of sites there, and then eventually it worked its way up north. Exactly the opposite of what archaeology was saying even in the 1980s. But of course, Cayce said this a long time ago. But of course, they say they ignore all that. Nobody would address any of that. And if they did, they'd say, man, he's full of nonsense. He made that up or whatever. Lucky
a broken
guess,
clock's
whatever.
worse twice a day.
Yeah, there you go. So as far as Bimini goes, that the first mention of all that came actually when a group of oil speculators took Cayce down to Miami, to the Halcyon Inn. And how that popped in my head, I've written that, but it popped in my head. The Halcyon Inn, great pictures of it too, really cool place. And they were asking him about possible oil in Bimini, because they had bought some prospecting leases to look for oil. And Cayce said there was no oil there, which, as it turns out, there isn't any oil there. He was correct about that. But Cayce, in that reading, it's like the last thing that he said before he was awakened from the hypnotic trance. He said, but this was once the highest point of a once great continent, Poseidia. And they just ignored it. And it was all written down, because he had everything from roughly 1923 till his death. Every single word was written down by a stenographer. And so there's 14,314 written, documented readings where all the questioning and all of his responses are in books. Those are all in the ARE. They're all online for ARE members to read. A big project, because it's 150,000 pages.
Yeah,
say that again, 150,000 pages of material. So they just ignored that. And then there was another reading about it, and in it, Cayce had said that this guy had stolen these gold coins, and he had gotten into a boat. I think it was like Wilmington, North Carolina, where he stole them from. And it was thousands of gold coins. And he went to Bimini, and he had them in these glass jars, and he hid them in a certain area along the shoreline under these trees. And I mean, if you've ever been there, there are sand, what people call sand dunes everywhere. And it's, heavily forested in some areas. And so they asked Cayce where this was, and he gave them general instructions. And they went back, and then they went and looked. And they came back and did a reading with Edgar about why couldn't they find this. And Edgar basically told them, it's your motives. It's the motives. That his higher, again, when I say Edgar said it, Edgar didn't remember anything he said. He was like gone.
It's like he was a
during
conduit.
this. Yeah, he was gone. It's wherever this information was coming from. And what they told him is that the motivations are color. That the word they used was shade. Your motivations can shade the information. It's like put a dark shadow over it, and that happened time and again in this. Some people lost things like watches and asked Edgar where it was, and he in fact often told them exactly where it was. But when it came to people finding undeserved riches, never worked. Undeserved riches had to do with oil. There were a lot of oil speculators, including Edgar himself, who he was always poor. Edgar became an oil speculator based on his own readings in it. But again, why doesn't it work? It always came back. It's your motives. The motivations aren't pure. So in that reading about the motives being impure, about all that gold in Bimini, he said that it had been the highest point of Poseidia, and that a portion of Poseidia would rise again. Expect it in 68 or 69, not so far away. Now, that's the exact quote from the reading. And again, he said that that was now the 30s, like 1932, 33. He also said it in the 40s. The Bimini Road was, in fact, discovered. You read a lot of misinformation wrong on the internet and wrong in books. They keep saying that a pilot, I know the pilots, I've interviewed one of the pilots. They keep saying that Trigg Adams and this other guy flew over it and saw it in 1968. And then it wasn't first visited till 1969. That's not that story. They've mushed together several other stories. But people did start looking there. Actually, as soon as Cayce said it, a group of people went to Bimini looking for it in the 1940s. And they actually looked for and found a well encircled by stones with carvings on them on Bimini, which one of the Cayce readings about Bimini talked about. He said there is this thing there. Now, I don't know anywhere else that was written. I have most of the history books about Bimini, and I can't find any mention of that well except in relatively new stuff after it was discovered. So I don't know how Edgar would know that. But anyway, in 1968, there was a guy by the name of J. Manson Valentine. He had a PhD in geology and biology. Valentine was the head of the Miami Historical Museum, and he started looking around Bimini everywhere, along with a oceanographer by the name of Dmitry Rybakov, PhD from the Sorbonne in France. So they started searching. Valentine was close to giving up. He had gone everywhere. So he did the smart thing, something that my wife and I did in the 10 years we were down there. He talked to locals, and he asked a guy, gave him some money and said, "Do you know of any stone formations on the bottom?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. It's a fishing hole. We all go there. It's got lots of fish." And it was the local that took him out to discover the so-called Bimini Road or Bimini Wall, which is not a road, of course. And that's how it was first found. And then Valentine, you see these old newspaper articles, which I have copies of. Is this the road? Was this the road to Atlantis? That's what some of the articles called it. And it certainly wasn't a road. It's certainly not a wall either. It's what Dmitry Rybakov said it was, an experienced oceanographer who'd worked in the Mediterranean. It was a harbor. It's a harbor formation.
Oh, man, that's awesome. That's what I thought when I saw that on Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah.
That show.
Yeah.
I was like, man, it looks like a port.
Yeah,
like where ships would go and dock.
You remember seeing the J and it had a boat in it from the air. That's my wife's video she took from a helicopter, which I gave to Graham to use. So that when you see that aerial, it's actually a video frame. I was out there with a film crew from Canada. And my wife went up in a helicopter that they paid for, along with another film crew, and they were and that helicopter almost crashed. The engine stopped. We didn't even know it. I was in the water scuba diving, and it went all the way down, and the bottom skimmed the water before the guy got the engine restarted. Scared the heck out of all of them, including my wife. Which again, none of us knew about it on the boat. We had no idea. But anyway. That was from her film, and it's incredible. It really shows the size of it and what a boat would look like inside of it. But that's what we said. It's multiple layers. That's what Graham said, because the report I sent Graham many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, had all that in it, including those photos. And he had seen the video and so on. And I had interacted with Graham quite a bit before the debate and a little after it. Immediately after it, we interacted some. But yeah, it's a port. It's a harbor area. It is a breakwater, also known as a quay, which some people say use the term quay because it's spelled Q-U-A-Y, pronounced key. Why? I don't know. But anyway, Cayce is that what Cayce meant? Well, I don't know. I think that it's probably Cayce said that Atlantis extended from Gibraltar all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, including all of the islands, which would include all the Bahamas and Cuba. It would include Haiti, Dominican Republic, and so on. And then also some of what he called the British Honduras, which is like Belize and part of Yucatan and so on. Cayce said it was all of that, bits and pieces of it. But the main part of it was on an island. So that's his story of it, and that's what we decided to look into. We did find a lot of interesting things. We've talked about it a lot, made some videos on it. But that's the story. Cayce, I believe, was a shaman, a modern shaman who was also a medicine person. But he was in the modern time when all shamans were considered frauds. If you actually read all the textbooks, they call them charlatans. That shaman are always called charlatans or hucksters, and I interacted with some archaeologists that literally use those terms about a Cheyenne medicine man that I knew and was interacting with. And they told me, these are mainstream archaeologists, they told me, they're a dime a dozen and they're all full of crap. But I don't believe that. I think some of them are connected to something. That something, for better or worse, lack of a term, I call the spiritual world. And the spiritual world, has a top and a bottom.
Yeah. Well, it's just like us, we got good eggs and bad eggs.
Yeah.
Same in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Gregg, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and talk with me and my listeners. And honestly, I look so forward to talking with you. I think you're one of the most interesting men that I've talked to. You've lived a very interesting life, and you've walked among giants, and you are one of those giants. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And sometime we'll do this again when I can finish that mountain encyclopedia. That's pretty much burning up all my time now. But I appreciate it very much, and we'll do it again.
Hey, I look forward to it. Hey, before we leave, let everybody know where they can find your work, website, anything you want to plug.
Best thing to do is to Google my name, Gregory L. Little. Put in my whole name. Gregory L is the middle initial, Little. And Twitter is the place to interact with me. I don't do much on any websites anymore. I do put articles on a few, but I don't interact much with that. But Twitter or X is the place to find me. And I've got a pretty active feed on Twitter.
Well, awesome. Well, guys, be sure to give him a follow. I follow him on his platforms. He's always posting. He's taking field trips to these mounds and showing you pictures and writing articles. And he's always posting, the newest finds in archaeology. He's up to date on all his stuff. So if you follow him, you are going to be up to date. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Be sure to check out Dr. Gregg's stuff. And until next time, torch is high, guys.